A birthday cake sat in a Mississippi church for a teenager who was dead, while the official cause and manner of his death were still unreleased. Around it were a number 19, candles, framed football jerseys, Nolan Wells' parents, and a congregation singing for the birthday he should have been there to celebrate. That contrast is the clearest way into this case. There is no shortage of people talking. There is no shortage of certainty online. But the central answer Nolan's family keeps asking for had not been publicly established. What happened to their son after a July trip to Horn Island? I want to separate that question from all the noise around it, because the noise has become part of the story. Lawyers are writing public letters. Commentators are arguing over photographs, alleged messages, a possible altercation, toxicology rumors, and whether people involved have been treated fairly. Nolan's mother has been criticized online. The young men who were with him have said they believe social media helped turn the case into a national controversy. Public figures have accused authorities of moving too slowly. Yet a basic fact still controls everything else. At that point, Nolan's cause and manner of death had not been released. That matters. A cause of death can describe the physical process that ended a life. A manner of death classifies the circumstances in a broader way. Without those official conclusions, every stronger public theory has to remain exactly what it is: a theory, an allegation, an inference, or a disputed claim. It may be emotionally satisfying to choose a side early. It is not the same as proving what happened. Nolan was 18 when he died. His 19th birthday arrived without him. His family gathered with supporters at Greater St. John Church in Mississippi, where his parents, Christine and Elmore, stood beside the cake while the congregation sang. Nolan was described as an Ocean Springs native. His jerseys, from Pee-wee football through middle school, high school, and his freshman year of college, were displayed at the altar. Those jerseys do something that internet arguments cannot. They restore scale. This was not a username inside a national fight. He had been a child in a uniform, then a teenager in another, then a college freshman with another season of life expected ahead of him. His father reduced the family's position to one sentence. They wanted to know what happened to their son. That question sounds simple because it is simple. It is also difficult because nearly every public dispute in this case sits between the family and a final answer. The incident at the center of the case traces back to a July trip to Horn Island. One public letter from attorneys representing Warren, Jacks, and Morgan said that at approximately 4:30 p.m. Central Time on July 4th, there were 24 occupants across two boats. That is the attorney's assertion, not an independently established finding. The same lawyers have called the three young men completely innocent. Again, that is their position. It deserves to be represented accurately, just as accusations against their clients need to be labeled accurately. The number 24 is worth pausing on because numbers can create a false sense of completeness. 24 people across two boats may broaden the pool of people who could have seen something, depending on where they were and when. It does not automatically establish that 24 people saw the same event, heard the same conversation, or knew Nolan's location at the same moment. The attorneys use the number to challenge a simpler public picture of a small, isolated group that may be relevant. But the number still has to be connected to individual observations before it can answer the family's question. A crowded outing can produce more witnesses, or it can produce more fragments. Without verified statements tying people to specific times and places, head count alone cannot reconstruct the day. This is where the case becomes unusually difficult to narrate. There is a large amount of public discussion, but much of it is argument about evidence rather than evidence with an official finding attached. A phone call is debated. Images are debated. Text messages are debated. The timing of a boat's departure is debated. Even the meaning of public silence, public interviews, and public defensiveness is debated. The audience can end up knowing more about what each camp says the evidence means than about what the evidence has actually established. I draw a hard line there. A lawyer's aggressive letter does not prove innocence. It does not prove guilt either. A grieving parent demanding answers does not create a criminal allegation. A young man complaining that social media made the story viral does not establish what happened on Horn Island. The existence of competing narratives is a fact. The truth of every claim inside those narratives is not. One of the clearest examples involves a video or image said to show a Triton boat with a large number of people leaving Horn Island. That kind of image sounds powerful because visuals feel immediate. You see a vessel, you see people. Your brain wants to place the image on a timeline, But a timeline requires more than recognition. It requires authentication, date, time, context, and a reliable connection to the event being discussed. A commentator who had shown the visual was asked directly whether he had the timestamp. He said he did not, and that he could ask the young men for it. That statement matters because earlier discussion around the same visual had leaned heavily on the idea that metadata could establish when it was made. In another exchange, a media figure said his outlet had concluded the visual was from July 4th based on what it had reviewed, including metadata. Those two statements are not necessarily impossible to reconcile because different people can possess different information, but they create an evidentiary problem for the viewer. Who actually saw the original file? Who possessed its metadata? And what exactly did that metadata establish? That answer remains unresolved. That is the payoff. The image may be important, but its importance depends on authentication that the narration cannot simply assume. A screenshot of a video, a repost, or a clip displayed on a show can lose the very information needed to fix it to a moment in time. If the time is central to an alibi or sequence, the metadata question is not technical trivia. It is the difference between an image and a timed piece of evidence. So I want a specific answer from you, which carries more weight in this dispute, the visual itself or verified proof of when it was created. Put one or the other in the comments and explain why. That same discipline has to be applied to the alleged text messages involving Warren and Nolan's mother. Images of messages were circulated publicly and described as exchanges between them. But the account presenting them also acknowledged a problem. Christine had not publicly confirmed their authenticity, and there was no independent demonstration that the displayed thread was complete. The person discussing them raised the possibility that messages could have been deleted. That possibility was speculation. No deletion was established. This is a useful place to notice how quickly uncertainty mutates online. First, someone posts images said to be messages. Then one side points to the messages as proof of cooperation. Another side asks whether anything was omitted. Soon the argument becomes about what a missing message might mean, even though no missing message has been demonstrated. That is how a case can acquire fictional certainty without anyone intentionally inventing a scene. People fill blank spaces because blank spaces are uncomfortable. The messages, if authentic and complete, could help establish communication between Warren and Christine during the period when she was trying to understand where Nolan was. They could show what was said and when it was said. They still would not, by themselves, establish what happened to Nolan. That distinction is important. Cooperation after an event and knowledge during an event are different questions. The public argument over a possible altercation is even more fragile. A woman was described online as claiming that she and her husband saw an argument involving Nolan on Horn Island and that her husband had video. That claim had not been authenticated. The woman's identity was not established there. The alleged video was not presented as verified evidence. One discussion suggested the dispute may have involved a woman named Katie, but even the people discussing it did not know what the alleged argument was about. There is another wrinkle. A former police officer turned commentator later said on a program that he had never heard of the alleged altercation. Yet an earlier clip attributed to him described receiving a direct message about a person who supposedly told someone, in substance, that she and her husband had seen that person arguing with Nolan. He also said at the earlier point that he had not yet spoken directly with the claimed witness. That inconsistency is real at the level of his public statements. It does not prove that an altercation occurred. It proves that his later claim of having heard nothing about such an allegation sits badly beside his earlier discussion of one. That is a smaller conclusion than the internet often wants, but it is a stronger one. We can say the statements conflict. We cannot say the alleged witness is genuine merely because a commentator discussed a message about her. We cannot say an argument happened because someone online said one did. We cannot say an argument caused Nolan's death. Those are separate steps, and no verified evidence bridges them. This is the pattern running through the entire story. One piece of information is introduced, then the public tries to make it carry more weight than it can safely hold. A boat image becomes an alibi before its timing is clear. A message thread becomes proof of character before its completeness is established. An alleged witness becomes proof of a confrontation before the witness and video are authenticated. A rumor about toxicology becomes a conclusion before the official result is released. The toxicology dispute shows the danger in its most obvious form. One commentator said a person had told him there was an over 100% chance, later described as 150%, that Nolan would have cocaine in his system. That number should stop you immediately. Probability does not become stronger because someone pushes it past 100. More importantly, the commentator was relaying what another person supposedly told him. He was not reporting an official toxicology result. Then another media figure said there were uncorroborated reports from what she considered a reliable informant that there was no cocaine in Nolan's system. That is the opposite claim, but it has the same limitation. It was described as uncorroborated. The autopsy was said to be complete, while the cause and manner of death still had not been publicly released, so neither public toxicology claim should be upgraded into fact. That leaves an official information gap surrounded by confident unofficial claims. That is not nothing. The gap itself shapes the case. It affects how people interpret every interview, every lawyer letter, every post, and every delay. But an information gap is not evidence of a cover-up. One caller publicly wondered whether the case had been intended to be closed quickly as a drowning. The host responded more cautiously, saying the concern was that people felt authorities might not have been investigating thoroughly enough. He explicitly stopped short of claiming that officials had information they were hiding. That distinction is worth protecting. Suspicion can be understandable without being proven. A family can demand a more transparent investigation without alleging a specific crime. Public pressure can be legitimate without giving commentators permission to invent answers. At the birthday gathering, Pastor Jamal Bryant framed the delays through race and history. He argued that if the racial identities of the young men had been reversed, authorities would have acted differently by then. That was his accusation and interpretation. He also criticized what he described as delayed subpoenas, sealed files, and a complaint involving Christine's nursing license. His language was forceful because he believed the family was facing unequal treatment. His broader racial comparison was not an official finding, but race had clearly become part of the public debate over how the investigation was being handled. Bryant also said that, as far as he understood, no person of interest had been named, and the young men had not been called in for official questioning, even though they had begun giving public interviews. He said the public should know more than it knew on July 8. Those are attributed statements from an advocate criticizing the investigation. They should not be silently converted into a complete account of what investigators did or did not do behind closed doors. The district attorney's public posture added another layer. A statement from the office was described as emphasizing that prosecutors cannot simply release information whenever they choose, and must follow legal restrictions. Some commentators interpreted the tone as defensive, or as an attempt to prepare the public for an outcome it might not like. That interpretation was never established. The statement itself can support a narrower point. Prosecutors were telling the public that the limits on disclosure were real. This is frustrating because legal secrecy and public trust can collide. Investigators may have reasons not to release evidence. Families may hear silence as indifference. Commentators may read delay as protection for someone. Defense lawyers may read public pressure as an attack on their clients. All of those reactions can exist at the same time without any one of them proving the final facts. And then there is the family, which is where the story stops being an argument about procedure and becomes painfully concrete again. Christine wrote to Nolan on what would have been his 19th birthday. She described raising him as a joy and thanked him for being a son, brother, grandson, nephew, godson, and friend. She called him the family's sunshine. She mentioned Oreo cake and told him, in the language of a mother writing to a son she had lost, not to eat too much of it and to hug his grandmother for them. The specificity is almost unbearable. Oreo cake, not a symbol, a family detail. At the church, she said this was the first birthday morning in 19 years when she had not sung happy birthday to him. She joked that she was never on key, but her children knew the tradition. That is the emotional low point of this case, because it clarifies what the investigation cannot give back. An eventual report can explain a mechanism. A grand jury can make a legal decision. A lawyer can issue another statement. None of those things restores the voice on the phone, the annual off-key song, or the young man who was supposed to be standing beside that cake. Subscribe if you want the unresolved evidence followed with the same rule every time. Prove what can be proved, and label the rest. Nolan's father, Elmore, spoke about leaning into the family and continuing to ask what happened. He said they would not be distracted. He also spoke about raising children with morals, character, and self-discipline. Two of Nolan's younger brothers were identified at the gathering as high school students and athletes. The scene at the altar connected all of those lives through the jerseys arranged in front of them. Pee Wee Middle School. High School. College. A sequence that should have continued. The public discussion sometimes reduces bereaved families to one visible spokesperson. This case pushed against that. Christine even corrected a supporter who told her he had her back, reminding him not to forget Elmore. It was a small exchange, but it reveals something useful without asking us to invent a private emotion. She was publicly insisting that her husband's grief be seen too. The family's attorneys said they wanted a full and transparent investigation. Supporters traveled from several cities for the birthday service. Bryant described people coming from Philadelphia, Chicago, Miami, and New Orleans, while most of those present were from the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Benjamin Crump attended the rally. Al Sharpton participated in a prayer event and offered to help secure an attorney for anyone who had been with Nolan and wanted to come forward. These facts show how far the case had moved beyond one family by that point. They do not tell us why Nolan died. The scale of attention may even make the fact-finding harder for the public to follow. Every new interview becomes an event. Every refusal to speak becomes an event. Every legal threat becomes an event. The three young men's lawyers sent multiple public letters to Nancy Grace and another to Don Lemon, accusing them of misleading coverage and defending Warren, Jacks, and Morgan as innocent. The attorneys challenged the focus on one disputed call and complained about what they saw as sensationalism. There is a temptation to read tone as evidence. An aggressive lawyer must be hiding something. A furious mother must know more than she says. A commentator who changes wording must be part of a cover-up. A prosecutor who cites secrecy must be preparing a disappointment. None of that is safe reasoning. Tone can tell you that people are under pressure. It cannot tell you the cause or manner of Nolan's death. One of the young men, in a public interview, complained that Nolan's mother had posted a photograph showing members of the group together on a boat, and that this helped make the story go viral. He said he wished that had not happened and believed the national attention might have been smaller without it. That statement is revealing, but maybe not in the way partisans want. It reveals that the public campaign had consequences for the people associated with Nolan's final trip. It does not establish whether those consequences were deserved, and it does not establish what happened on the island. The three young men were reported to have joined an online prayer event around Nolan's birthday. A commentator speculated that they did so because of criticism over their absence from the funeral. That motive was not established. Their presence on a call can be stated. Why they joined was not established. This is where the case needs a reset in perspective. The people around Nolan are not pieces on a board. His parents are not evidence. His friends are not evidence, simply because they gave interviews. A lawyer's politics are not evidence. A commentator's politics are not evidence. A complaint about media coverage is not evidence of guilt. Public sympathy is not evidence of innocence. Evidence has to do the work. One question around jurisdiction shows how quickly even a legitimate procedural issue can become speculative. A caller said Nolan's body had been located on federal land and asked why the federal government had not taken over. The host agreed that the location was federal land because it was part of a national park and said the FBI had some involvement but had not taken over the case. He also said the Congressional Black Caucus, the NEC, the family, and the attorneys were urging greater federal assistance. That describes the public jurisdiction debate. It does not establish the caller's later speculation about presidential pardons, political strategy, or a planned racial conflict. Those claims go far beyond what was verified and should be left there. That separation is crucial because true crime coverage can become a machine for laundering possibilities into facts. Someone raises a question. Another person repeats it as a concern. A third person summarizes it as something authorities are looking at. A week later, an audience remembers it as confirmed. The grammar changes before the evidence does. Nolan's case has several examples of that process. The alleged altercation is one. The toxicology rumor is another. The completeness of the alleged text messages is another. The image timing is another. Each starts with a potentially relevant piece of information. Each can matter if authenticated. None should be made stronger by repetition alone. I keep coming back to the metadata dispute because it is a compact version of the entire case. An image can look definitive and still lack the context needed to answer the important question. Public confidence can attach itself to the picture because the picture is visible. The missing timestamp is less visible. Yet the missing piece may matter more than the thing everyone can see. The same is true of Nolan's death. The public can see the people. It can see the boat photographs being discussed. It can see lawyers. It can see a church full of supporters. It can see the family's anger and grief. It can see media personalities battling over who has the better version of events. What it cannot see is an official cause and manner of death. That absence should control the certainty of every theory built around it. There was also a public statement that authorities were waiting on toxicology and a grand jury. At the birthday service, those delays were recited almost as a list of everything standing between the family and an answer. Whether each delay was ordinary, necessary, excessive, or avoidable is not established here. What is established is the family's experience of waiting. A grand jury also changes the public posture of a case because its work is generally discussed far less openly than the arguments happening on television and social media. That difference can feel upside down. The loudest conversation may contain the least verified information, while the process with legal power says the least. The imbalance is frustrating, but silence from a legal process cannot be filled with guesses simply because the public conversation is louder. 46 days was the figure cited during the coverage. 46 days since Nolan went missing, according to the discussion. By then, the family was not asking for internet detectives to choose a villain. They were asking for information about their son's death. That difference gets lost when the loudest voices frame every update as a victory for one side. A better way to read the case is to track what changes status. A claim begins as an allegation. Does a named witness confirm it? A visual begins as a clip. Does authenticated metadata fix it to a date and time? A toxicology rumor circulates. Does the official report confirm it? A person says he was never aware of an allegation. Does an earlier recording show him discussing something materially similar? That last question can be answered from the public clips described in the coverage. Yes, his public statements appear inconsistent, but even that payoff has limits. An inconsistent commentator is not the cause of Nolan's death. The same disciplined approach protects the young men whose names have been pulled into the story. Warren, Jax, and Morgan have attorneys publicly asserting their innocence. No authority had publicly charged them with a crime in connection with Nolan's death. The host himself noted that the public conversation could feel like a homicide trial, even though no authority had publicly established a homicide. That is an important warning. If the case remains unresolved, innocent people can be damaged by speculation. If wrongdoing is eventually established, careless speculation can still muddy the path to proving it. The family's right to ask questions and the young men's right not to be falsely accused can exist together. Those positions do not cancel each other out. In fact, they depend on the same thing: a trustworthy process that distinguishes evidence from accusation. That is why the attacks on Christine's nursing credentials became such a charged issue. Bryant and others treated complaints against her license as intimidation against a grieving mother. No public finding identified who filed every complaint, why, or what the licensing process concluded. The issue, nevertheless, became part of the public pressure surrounding the family. That matters because it expands the consequences of the case beyond the investigation itself. The fight over Nolan's death had begun touching his mother's professional life. At the same time, criticism directed toward the young men had moved into national media. Their lawyers responded publicly and sharply. One letter argued that critics were obsessed with what the attorneys called a red herring involving a call. Another referenced matching blue pickup trucks. Without the underlying records fully presented and authenticated here, those phrases cannot responsibly be turned into a factual reconstruction. They are signposts of disputed evidence, not conclusions. This is one of the hardest things to accept about an unresolved case. Sometimes the most responsible sentence is also the least emotionally satisfying. No verified evidence establishes that point. It does not establish the alleged altercation. It does not establish a cocaine finding. It does not establish that messages were deleted. It does not establish that officials covered anything up. It does not establish that the three young men committed a crime. What was established was that Nolan died after a July trip to Horn Island, that his family was still seeking answers, and that the official cause and manner had not been publicly released at that point. That last sentence should sound almost plain. Good plain facts are useful when a case has become overloaded with interpretation. There are human facts too. Nolan's mother remembered his calls. His father spoke about raising a family with discipline and character. His younger brothers stood with the family at a service where people had arranged his athletic history in frames. A birthday cake waited beside them. Those details do not prove a theory. They tell us what the theory is about. One advocate said Nolan's name had reached buildings, churches, and streets around the world. Whatever the exact scale of that claim, the case had clearly drawn attention far beyond Mississippi. That kind of attention can force institutions to explain themselves. It can also reward the most extreme voices. Both things can happen together. So the useful question is not which camp feels more convincing, it is which claims have crossed the line from assertion into evidence. On the image, the timing remains the critical issue. On the alleged texts, authenticity and completeness remain the issues. On the alleged altercation, the claimed witness and video remain unverified. On toxicology, the competing media claims remain unofficial. On the investigation, supporters describe delay and insufficient transparency, while prosecutors invoke legal limits on disclosure. On criminal responsibility, no charge or official homicide finding is established here. That is already a substantial map of the case. It tells us where certainty is justified and where it is not. There is another reason to stay disciplined. Nolan's family has been explicit about not wanting distraction. Elmore said it at the service. Their question was not, which commentator won this week? It was not, which lawyer wrote the most combative letter? It was not, which political label should be attached to the people involved? Their question was, what happened to Nolan? That question has a moral force, because it is factual before it is ideological. A parent is entitled to want an explanation for a child's death. A friend accused online is entitled to want evidence rather than rumor. An investigator is entitled to protect information when the law requires it. A public that has watched contradictory claims is entitled to ask what has actually been verified. None of those rights requires us to pretend the unknown is known. If an authenticated file eventually places a boat at a certain location and time, that will matter. If a verified witness account establishes an argument, that will matter. If toxicology is officially released, that will matter. If a grand jury acts, that will matter. Until then, the responsible story is not empty. It is the story of a family living inside the delay, while a parallel public investigation races far ahead of the official record. That parallel investigation has its own incentives. Television rewards conflict. Social media rewards confidence. Lawyers defend clients. Activists apply pressure. Families plead for attention because attention can keep a case visible. Commentators build narratives because narratives are easier to follow than unresolved fragments. The danger comes when the narrative begins deciding what the facts must be. Nolan's case resists that pressure if you let it. The strongest details are concrete enough without embellishment. Horn Island. 2 boats, according to the attorneys. 24 occupants at roughly 4:30 p.m., according to the attorneys. A disputed visual said to show a Triton leaving the island. A timestamp one commentator acknowledged he did not have. An alleged witness claim that had not been authenticated. Conflicting toxicology talk with no official result presented. A district attorney emphasizing limits on disclosure. A family gathering on a 19th birthday without the person whose name was on the cake. Those are not equal categories of fact. Some are established events, some are attributed claims, some are unresolved evidence questions. Keeping those categories separate is the work. And there is one more category. How Nolan's family described the person they knew. His mother wrote that he brought joy and laughter to the family. That is her description, and it belongs to her. The family celebrated him as a son, brother, grandson, nephew, godson, friend, student, and athlete. Supporters at the church were not gathering around an abstract mystery. They were gathering around the absence of one person. The public pressure may continue. New claims may collide. Attorneys may issue more statements. Commentators may announce that one detail changes everything. When that happens, the standard should remain boring and strict. Show what changed. Did the claim become authenticated? Did an authority adopt it? Did a document establish a time? Did a witness go on the record? Did a forensic result become official? If not, the status did not change, merely because the volume did. Keep asking for evidence, not slogans. That is the action this case demands most. Not a rush to accusation, not reflexive dismissal of the family's concerns. Evidence. A transparent explanation when the process allows it. Clear distinctions between what investigators know, what advocates believe, what defense lawyers argue, what media personalities report, and what the public merely suspects. Nolan's parents have already stated the simplest standard. What happened to our son? The power of that sentence comes from how little it assumes. It does not name a culprit. It does not prescribe a manner of death. It asks for a truthful account. The final image in this case should not be a lawyer's letter or a commentator's clip. It should be the church. Framed jerseys trace Nolan's life, from youth football toward college. His younger brothers are there. His parents are there. A number 19 marks the age he should have reached. People sing. His mother has already passed through the first birthday morning in 19 years, when she did not sing to him at home. Outside that room, the case is crowded with claims. Inside it, the question is almost brutally clean. A family has buried a son and still wants the official story of how he died. Until that answer is established, the most important discipline is refusing to let anyone, on any side, fill the blank with certainty they have not earned. Because the blank is still there, and sitting beside it, almost impossibly ordinary, is a birthday cake for Nolan Wells.